My name is Hannah, and 19 years ago, my father didn't just walk away from me, he erased me. Tonight, when he mocked me in front of everyone as if I were nothing, I felt that old wound split open again, right before the groom turned toward me and did something that silenced the entire room. I left Sacramento before the heat settled in, driving west until the highways narrowed into winding vineyard roads. Napa had that sharp summer dryness that made every hillside look sunburned and expensive. Estate reserve signs lined the entrance of the property, the kind of place where people cared more about appearances than truth. I wasn't here to reconcile with anyone. I wasn't looking for closure through conversation or forgiveness. I just wanted to stand in the same place as the people who had lived comfortably without me for nearly 2 decades, breathe the same air for a moment, and then walk away for good. The silver necklace resting against my collarbone felt heavier than usual. My mother had given it to me long before life split in opposite directions, long before survival became something I had to learn alone. It was the only piece of home that had never betrayed me. When I reached the check-in table, my name wasn't anywhere on the seating chart. Rows of elegant calligraphy listed every guest, every connection that mattered to the new family he built. But not me. The absence sat on the board like a deliberate smudge. Inside the reception hall, one table near the center had a single empty chair, pulled slightly back from the rest. It looked unclaimed, unnecessary, like a quiet reminder of the space I used to occupy in someone's life. I stepped fully into the room just as he turned. His eyes froze for half a second when they landed on me, then shifted into something tighter unease, irritation, and a flicker of fear, as if my presence carried a truth sharp enough to ruin the entire celebration. I hadn't been in the reception space for more than a minute before my father began pretending I was a shadow he couldn't shake off. He moved through small groups of relatives with the ease of a man who had rehearsed every greeting in advance, careful to position himself so my presence stayed slightly behind him, as though I were an uninvited guest trailing too close. When someone finally asked who I was, he didn't turn fully toward me. He just gave a half-hearted nod in my direction, offering the bare minimum his eldest, living her own life somewhere, the family not knowing much about it anymore. His tone dipped with a calculated heaviness, painting me as a figure he pitied from afar rather than a daughter standing 10 feet away. Linda hovered near him, immaculate in pale pink, watching me with a tight, managerial smile that never reached her eyes. Everything about her expression said the same thing: I didn't fit the aesthetic of the family she curated. A smudge on a clean tablecloth, a disruption to her perfect day. The story he told next was the one that hit me hardest. He slipped into a softened voice, recounting how difficult it had been when I left at 19, how he tried everything, how his heart broke watching me walk away. Not a single part of that version was true. Yet people's sympathetic nods came easily, effortlessly, as if the narrative had been crafted exactly for this kind of audience. Tyler wandered over, drawn by the cluster of quiet gasps. His confusion was immediate. He stared at me like someone trying to reconcile a missing puzzle piece he didn't know existed. There was no malice in his face, only the realization that he'd grown up inside a story built on someone else's absence. My father's wine glass caught the evening sun as he lifted it again, the dark red flickering like a warning light each time he spoke. It was the kind of image that would have made me laugh. Years ago, his performance was always strongest when there was an audience, but standing here now, I felt the old suffocation press against my ribs. I forced myself to breathe steadily. I had learned to function without him long ago. Still, hearing him reshape the past for applause made something cold settle in my chest. I started to turn away, ready to get air, when a familiar voice cut through the noise behind me. Hannah. Is that you? I froze. Of all people, I never expected to see him here. He stepped toward me with recognition brightening his face, a former colleague from the emergency unit. Relief came for half a heartbeat until he leaned in and began forming the first syllable of a code name that had no place in a public setting. I caught his arm quickly, sending him a look sharp enough to stop him mid-breath. Understanding washed over him just as fast. He swallowed whatever he had almost said, but someone else had seen the exchange. Daniel, the groom, stood a few feet away, his attention narrowing on us with quiet intensity. He didn't ask questions. He didn't interrupt. He simply watched, absorbing the clipped interaction with a focus I recognized instantly. Someone who'd been trained to notice what others overlook. As the crowd shifted, my colleague slipped away, leaving behind a tension I felt in my shoulders. Daniel didn't look away. His gaze wasn't hostile or curious. It was searching, like he was matching a distant recollection to the woman standing in front of him. A voice called him from across the courtyard, without breaking eye contact. He lifted his phone and stepped aside. The tone he used when he answered dropped into something low and controlled. He angled his body away from the crowd, listening intently, jaw tightening with every second that passed. When he returned, he didn't rejoin his family. He stopped near the vineyard's edge, watching me with an expression that had shifted from curiosity to certainty. Something had clicked for him, something he wasn't supposed to know. His hand curled slowly into a fist, the gesture small but telling, as if he had already made a decision he couldn't unmake. And he didn't look away from me, not once. The reception shifted outdoors as the sun began its slow descent over the vineyard, casting long copper streaks across the tables. My father stood squarely in the center of a lively group, holding his wine glass at an angle that caught the dying light, making the red liquid glow like a streak of blood suspended in glass. He spoke proudly about his perfect family, each word polished for display. It didn't take long for someone to mention me, and he let out a thin, dismissive laugh before answering, "Oh." Her? She drifted away from the family years ago. The entire table chuckled, as if he'd shared an amusing anecdote. A dull ache tightened behind my ribs, but I stayed silent. I had learned long ago that confronting him only fed his theatrics. A man beside him, older and already several drinks in, leaned forward and asked casually what I did for a living. I kept my voice steady, offering only what I was allowed. "I work in emergency response." He burst out laughing, and another guest joined in, tossing out a comment about operators and ringing phones. The laughter spread quickly, catching legs the way fire raced across dry grass. My father took a slow sip from his glass before adding his own blow. "She likes to pretend she does something important, but honestly, there's not much worth mentioning." The laughter cracked open wider. Sympathy flickered across a few faces. Disdain covered others. I felt exposed, as though every version of me he had ever invented was being held up for judgment. My gaze drifted outward, searching for an escape, and landed on Daniel a few yards away. He wasn't laughing, he wasn't smiling. He was watching my father's performance with an expression that looked almost familiar. Something in that moment, in his stillness, hinted that the lies colliding now were hitting a memory inside him. The light shifted cooler as the sun dipped lower. A strange chill settled over the courtyard, cutting through the warm evening air. Before I could move, he stepped closer. His voice was so low, only I could hear it. "Pacific Ridge. Hannah, was that you?" My entire body froze. That mission wasn't supposed to exist outside sealed files and classified briefings. He wasn't supposed to know, but he did. A breeze rolled in from the vines, carrying the scent of thyme and rosemary as Daniel guided me behind the floral archway at the edge of the lawn. His voice dropped into a tone tight with certainty. "You were there, at Pacific Ridge. I remember the reports." I shook my head instinctively, refusing to confirm what I had never admitted aloud. I wasn't authorized to acknowledge any part of it. Then he mentioned a detail, one so specific, so deeply buried within the FATRU and military teams involved, that my breath hitched. Only those who had stood inside that sealed perimeter would know it. The question formed before I could stop it. How did he know his answer came quietly? He'd once served with a medical support unit connected to the Pentagon, and during a high-risk extraction years ago, he'd read encrypted files that included my unit designation. "I didn't think I'd ever meet you," he whispered, and something in my chest shifted sharply. Unsettled, he pulled out his phone, pausing just long enough for our eyes to meet. I didn't give permission, but my silence said everything. He stepped away, calling someone with a tone that thickened the longer he listened. Each passing second drained the uncertainty from his face until only recognition remained. When he returned, The groomly politeness was gone. He looked at me with the steady, grounded certainty of someone who now understood exactly who I was and what had been done to bury it. A change began unfolding behind his eyes, a quiet determination ready to topple everything built on lies in this place. Back in the reception area, my father approached the stage to begin his formal toast. Daniel stood across from me, hands clasped, shoulders squared, preparing himself for something that would alter not just the night, but the entire trajectory of my life. The evening lights flickered on overhead, strung between rows of olive trees like soft golden threads. The acoustic duo at the far end shifted into a mellow melody, but the air around my table felt tight, as if the room itself were bracing. My father stood again, already too loud, already too eager to command attention. He raised his glass high. "My eldest daughter has something she'd like to say." The words dropped like a stone. Dozens of eyes turned toward me. I rose slowly, forcing a measured breath into my lungs. I had not agreed to anything. He simply wanted me displayed, compliant, a prop to polish the narrative he cherished. I opened my mouth, steadying myself. "I don't have anything to—" He cut in immediately, lifting his voice so it floated across the entire courtyard. "She should be grateful my family welcomed her here tonight." A ripple of soft laughter drifted through the crowd. Heat shot up the sides of my neck. A woman nearby murmured just loud enough to be heard, "She looks like someone who got thrown out by her parents." Linda nodded in silent agreement, the kind of nod that said she'd been thinking the same thing all evening. Across the courtyard, Daniel stood among a cluster of groomsmen, but his focus never left me. His eyes carried a sharpness that sliced through the haze of embarrassment rising in my chest. My father leaned toward me, his voice biting and quiet, the words only meant for my ears. "Don't you dare make me look bad in front of these people." It was the same command I had lived under for 19 years, condensed into one sentence. I stepped back, putting space between his need for control and my own body. He straightened again, chest swelling. "She ran off at 19, couldn't handle responsibility. After everything I did for her, that's how she repaid me." A few guests gasped, others exchanged looks. Tyler's confusion twisted deeper, his eyes darting between me and the man he thought he knew. Linda tried to tug my father back into his chair, but he brushed her off, drunk on attention. The air turned brittle, like glass seconds before shattering. Then Daniel moved. He stepped forward with a decisive stride, breaking from the groomsmen, ignoring the hushed calls behind him. He didn't look at the bride. He didn't look at his own family. He looked only at me, and I knew. He was about to do something no one here was prepared to witness. Daniel reached me with a steady, unwavering pace. Conversations faltered. The musicians slowed without realizing it. The entire courtyard shifted its attention as he stopped an arm's length away. A breeze lifted the edge of his vest, and warm light from the overhead bulbs brushed against his cheek. His posture firmed, solid as stone. Then he did the unthinkable. He saluted me, not playfully, not ironically, not privately, a full, formal, military-grade gesture in the middle of his own wedding. Silence swallowed everything. Even the insects near the vines seemed to pause. It felt as if time itself refused to move. He held the salute long enough that no one could mistake it for a joke. Recognition rippled through the crowd, fear through my father, and something like awe across the faces of those who had mocked me minutes earlier. Daniel lowered his hand and spoke, his voice ringing through the courtyard. "You have no idea who she really is." A collective shift followed, heads turning, breaths catching. My father faltered, his balance shifting as if the ground had tilted beneath him. Daniel continued, his voice cutting through the stunned air. "She saved lives, hundreds, maybe thousands. Pacific Ridge wasn't an accident. It was a containment breach, and she was there." Shock tore through the guests. Chairs scraped. Someone stood abruptly. Tyler stared at me like he was seeing a completely different person. Linda pressed a hand over her mouth. My father lost all color. A military officer among the guests leaned in to whisper urgently, "That's a federal emergency response code." But how does she respect spread across the courtyard like a quiet wave? Then came the final blow. Daniel recited the FIRU designation that should never have been spoken aloud. Hannah Phillips, Unit A-17, primary responder during Pacific Ridge containment. My breath stilled. That code was supposed to be erased from every public record. The man who had just humiliated me moments earlier now stood frozen, stripped of every lie he'd ever told about me. No one moved. Not a single sound rose above the evening air. Only Daniel stood firm, hands trembling slightly with the weight of what he'd revealed. And in the stillness that followed, I understood nothing would ever be the same again. Not for me, not for him, not for the family who tried to erase me. Daniel stayed in front of me, breath steady, shoulders squared, his voice carrying through the courtyard without needing volume. She is the reason Pacific Ridge didn't turn into a national tragedy. The silence around us tightened until it felt like the entire vineyard was holding its breath. No laughter remained, no shifting chairs, just shock, raw and absolute. A former service member rose slowly, eyes narrowing as the memories aligned. Are you certain she's the one from the reports? Daniel's answer came without hesitation. Absolutely. That single word carved straight through the false history my father had built, exposing years of deception in one clean strike. Someone at the far table whispered, horrified, that mission killed half the responders. My fingers curled into my palm, grounding myself. That part of the story had lived on my shoulders alone for 19 years. They weren't meant to know, and yet here it was unavoidable. Tyler stepped forward, voice cracking. Why didn't Dad ever tell us this? The question shattered whatever composure my father had left. Linda reached for him, but he recoiled, his face paling beneath the string lights. Daniel moved closer, gaze locked on him. You mocked a federal responder who saved lives, including people tied to my unit. My father looked for someone, anyone to defend him. No one did. I didn't need to speak. The truth had already spoken for me. Every gaze in the courtyard shifted toward me, the weight of silence settling like a final invitation. I knew then it was time not to retaliate, not to win, but simply to restore what had been twisted for nearly 2 decades. When I finally spoke, my voice came out soft but clear. My father wasn't the one left behind. I was. The air stilled. Even the music had faded without anyone noticing. My father lurched forward, panicked. Hannah, that's not the whole truth. I met his eyes, steady and unflinching. I was 19. You chose Linda. I chose survival. The words hung there, unembellished, undeniable. No one laughed this time. No one tried to smooth things over. Linda stepped forward, already preparing her defense. Raymond did what he thought was best. Daniel shut it down with a single sentence. Ma'am, the truth doesn't need your help. A sharp gasp moved through the crowd. Linda froze, her mouth tightening as the room shifted away from her. Then Tyler approached, the tremor in his voice betraying the crack in his world. No one ever told us you were this? We didn't know. I looked at him, really looked, and saw no guilt. Only a young man raised on a version of life built from someone else's lies. I couldn't blame him for that. He had been a child inside a story crafted to erase me. Behind him, my father's face crumpled, not with remorse, but with the dawning realization that his perfectly sculpted persona had slipped through his fingers. Tears welled as he reached toward me. Hannah, please, don't leave like this. But in his eyes, I saw the truth he could never admit. He wasn't afraid of losing me. He was afraid of losing the way people looked at him. A gust swept through the vineyard, rustling the olive leaves above us. The night air tasted different, lighter, clearer. There was nothing left to explain, nothing left to fix. Only one step remained to walk away. I walked past the rows of vines, the golden lights stretching across the stone path like a quiet send-off. The noise of the wedding faded behind me, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves in the warm Napa breeze. Daniel followed only a few steps, stopping beside me with a look that carried more understanding than anything said all night. You deserved better than all of this. I nodded, dry-eyed. I had shed every tear for my father years ago. Nothing about tonight could reopen wounds that had already scarred over. Then I heard my name, not barked, not slurred, but but fragile. Hannah, please. I turned back and saw him standing alone, stripped of every performance he had worn like armor. For the first time in years, his voice held no pride, only a desperate tremor. I met his eyes without anger, without hope, simply acknowledging the end of something that had died long before tonight. I didn't walk closer. I didn't offer softness. I didn't hand him forgiveness he hadn't earned. Goodbye, Dad. At the car, the wind carried the scent of wine and fresh grass, filling my lungs with a strange, weightless feeling, hollow, but in a way that made room for something new, like the last remnants of a toxin finally leaving my body. I drove away as the sky deepened into dusk, the vineyard rose slipping behind me. For the first time in 19 years, the road ahead felt like mine.